All right, greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sail, here to shine a light on the goings on down south and some ideas from the southern tip of Africa. But ideas that again, as I keep repeating, that are not just relevant here to southern Africa, but also, I think, to the wider Western world, maybe even wider than that. Tonight's going to be a solo stream, no guest, but next week I'm going to have a guest on again. Tonight's topic is straightforward. It is an Afrikaner perspective on the go back to Europe rhetoric. Now, this is not if you are an Afrikaner or even just a white South African, you've encountered this rhetoric, whether it be online, from politicians, from the commentariat, from the media, everywhere. You get this type of rhetoric. Somewhere you will have encountered it. But I want to add a little bit of nuance here in regards to the sources. So it's not just from land back leftists or from anti-white or anti-Afrikaner or just overall anti-Western voices that this type of rhetoric is coming from. It also comes from people on the right side of the political spectrum, but with a completely different sentiment behind it. So the former case, when it comes from leftists, it is malicious. It comes from a place of hatred. When that type of comment comes from the right side of the political spectrum, it's rather a sympathetic type of comment of, we see the challenges that you are going through in South Africa. Why don't you just come live here in Europe or in America and come build here rather than continue to face all of these challenges there in South Africa? And it's not that simple. And many of the topics or many of the themes and ideas I'm going to be discussing here tonight are nothing new to many of you that have been subscribed to my channel for a long while. Many of these ideas I have discussed in some form previously. But as I told Jay Burden last week off air, that sometimes some ideas are worth repeating, even if some of you old hats or some of you that have been here a long while have heard them already. I'm going to keep repeating them and keep discussing them because I think they are very important. And one of those topics, one of those ideas is identity. And I don't think this idea, like I say, these ideas are not going to be just relevant to my Afrikaner audience or my Western audience or my Afrikaans speaking audience or my South African minority audience or whatever specific demographic. I think matters of identity are crucial to discuss, to debate. Basically, the question, who are we? And I'm currently writing an opinion piece on that question. I haven't decided who I'm going to submit it to, but it is on identity and that question of who are we? And I wanted to read, this is a quote I have read on the channel before, but it's the quote that is the intro to my new opinion piece as well. But this is what it's all about. And this is from Samuel Huntington, someone that I have quoted quite a bit on this channel and in my writing. He wrote in the early 90s, he wrote that in the post-Cold War world, the most important distinctions among people are not ideological, political, or economic. They are cultural. People and nations are attempting to answer the most basic question humans can face. Who are we? And that's what I want to be talking about here tonight, that question of who are we? And not specifically in the sense of I'm going to tell you exactly what the textbook definition of who the Afrikaners are or who the Boers are or who the whatever are, but rather to speak about specifically that question, who are we? And to help maybe if you are living in a community going through an identity crisis or where you see an identity crisis on the horizon, that maybe can contribute to finding a solution and finding some answers to this question. I see there's already a lot of people in the chat. Goeienaand, good evening. Nice to see that we have a nice audience here already. All right. I hope you guys are ready for just a chill discussion stream. Remember, send in your questions in the live chat, your comments, and I will be incorporating them into the stream as I go. As I said, I am working on an opinion piece, so these types of streams and discussions always help me formulate my ideas As I also mentioned last week with Jay Burden, a lot of the ideas that are discussed on live streams are often half-baked. They're ideas that are being explored, but that I then later can turn into something more substantial. I see a lot more people are raising their hands just to show that they are in attendance. A little roll call going on there. All right, so let's begin with tonight's conversation and topic. So from time to time in the South African political discourse on the radio, television, or online, but never in person, you encounter the crude rhetoric along the lines of go back to Europe or go back to Holland or whatever crude form it takes, which is directed at white South Africans, so often particularly Afrikaners, in regards to go back to Holland. These comments are often made in the form of a question when directed at white South Africans who refuse to accept the South African government's laundry list of racially discriminatory laws, or when they condemn incitement of violence like kill the Boer chant. And that question that they then face is, why don't you just go back to Europe? It was like a frustrated question from a lot of these hateful individuals. I have no doubt that many English white South Africans also have robust responses to this question, and that do not simply boil down to not being able to afford immigration or liking the African weather. And therefore, I encourage you, if you have these types of thoughts and feelings and sentiments, to pen it and to share them. I can only respond to this type of rhetoric from my own personal perspective as an Afrikaner. Those with festering ethnic hatred who constantly voice their frustrated bewilderment with why Afrikaners don't just go back to Europe when faced with discrimination, murderous chants, political marginalization, and other challenges in South Africa actually reveal a core deficiency in themselves. Now, bear with me here. When they ask that frustrated question about why don't you just go back to Europe? Why are you still here? Why are you still building here in South Africa? A fundamental, what they are demonstrating is that they have a flaw in themselves. And that flaw is a fundamental and evident inability to grasp what it means to be culturally tied to a place, to the land, to be genuinely tied to the land, and what it means to be primarily driven by factors other than material well-being or wealth. So to put it more simply, it's like a lot of these Afro-nats, these African nationalists, they talk about or land nationalists, what a label you want to use for them. They talk about how they connected to the land, sons of the soil, they're proud to be African, they're tied to the African continent. And then they see a culture like the Afrikaners that name themselves after the continent, that incorporate the continent into their culture, that are proud of their heritage here at the southern tip of Africa, that don't just leave or immigrate or go back to Europe, back in thick quotation marks when things get tough here, but they stick around and rather build. And then these Afro-nats look at them and say, why? They're confused. Like, why don't you just leave? Why are you still here? Why do you stay in Africa? And it shows that as it appears to me, that they don't seem to understand what it means to be tied to a place. It's like someone telling you that their favorite artist, their favorite music artist is Bob Dylan. And then the times are changing, starts playing on the radio. And then that person's like, wow, this is a nice song. Who's this? It's the same thing. These people that claim to be so proud of their connection to Africa and they're connected to the soil. And then when they encounter a culture that experiences that same sentiment, they're confused. They're like, what is this? What's going on here? So, I mean, that's a big element in it. I see Gert Jansen van Rensburg, regular on the channel, say goeienaand aan almal. Goeienaand Gert, lekker om vir jou te sien. I've mentioned this before. I've actually met Gert in real life, completely coincidental, here up north in Gauteng. I was shopping at a Westpac, and him and his wife recognized me and were nice enough to come say hello, and it was very nice. We had a nice chat. Up here on this side of the Fall River. Yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce your name, but maybe I will. Zigila Notata says, hello from Torquay, England. Hello, hello. Hello van Pretoria, South Africa. Gert says, my answer to those who tell me to go back to Europe, my response is always when they go back to central part of Africa where they fled from. It's the question of, where do your ancestors come from? What's the difference between my ancestors coming here by boat and your ancestors coming here by foot? That's the difference. So the only people that really have like a ancient connection to Southern Africa are the Khoi and the San and all the different groups related to them. The rest all came here either by ship or by foot, unless they want to claim that they just sprouted out of the ground here. Stefan Jacob say, hello van Zurich. Hello, Stefan. Nice to see we're getting an audience from all across the world. Stefan, are you Afrikaner diaspora in Europe, or are you not Afrikaner? I see Stefan is Jacobs. I mean, that sounds pretty Afrikaans, but let me know. Are you part of the international canton of Afrikaners, the Afrikaner diaspora? So yeah, back to the point. So here's the point that these people that talk about go back to Europe just don't understand. And like I said, there are two parts. There's the sympathetic rhetoric from people on the more to the right side of the spectrum that say, like, why don't you just leave? Come, you can build here in Europe. And then from the left side, the more malicious of like a hatred fueled, why don't you just leave? But both need to hear this message, and that is that Afrikaners know no other. Don't. No, that's a tongue twister. Afrikaners know no other home than Southern Africa. Our culture and language were formed here over centuries and many generations. I myself am a ninth generation. My first ancestor landed here in 1688. That's 9 generations ago, before America was even a country. Afrikaners even name themselves after the continent. Our language of Afrikaans is indigenous to Southern Africa, and anyone that ever tells you that the language of Afrikaans is not indigenous to South Africa, you can just ask them a very simple question. All right, if Afrikaans is not indigenous to South Africa, to what country is it indigenous to? And you wait for the answer. And you'll see them floundering like, oh, Netherlands. And like, nobody speaks it there. The language didn't originate there. There's not an Afrikaans speaking community in like a massive part of the population in the Netherlands. So it can't be indigenous to there. They're like, oh, Germany, France, or whatever. What stupid answer. And you're like, well, it speaks for itself. Why that can't be true? So just ask them that simple question. It completely breaks their brain and makes them twist into the shape of a pretzel. So Afrikaner philosopher M.P. van Wyk Louw, guy that I often quote on this channel, wrote that, in his words, Afrikaners are not just a small colonial group of officials and traders like the whites in the British and Dutch East Indies, but a rooted people with no other home. End quote. So, to put it simply in metaphor, if Afrikaner culture was a plant, the only soil or substrate that it would be able to grow in would be the African soil. Since Afrikaners are not a satellite community of a larger empire, this group cannot simply be ordered home by a colonial headquarters in London, Amsterdam, or Lisbon, nor can they flee home. It's simply not an option. It's not part of the game. It's not on the table as an option. Stefan say yes. All right, Stefan, so you are part of the Afrikaner diaspora. There's a lot of Afrikaners out there in the world, and I'm glad that you are still keeping connected to your culture and to what's happening in South Africa. It's super important to keep that connection, and I'm glad to see that you are. Let's see. Zach Delden Ekblom, first time I see you in the chat, says the peoples of South Africa come from different places, but you are bound together by the future. The Xhosas, the Zulus, the Afrikaners, the British, the Indians, you all share the same tomorrow. Well, that's what's to be figured out, is what that future and that tomorrow looks like. But and I'm going to get to that point as well regarding Afrikaners. I think that's also something that these why don't you just go back to Europe types, what they have to get through their heads is that as far as we can foresee into the future, the South African social, political, cultural, sport, physical landscape is going to be intertwined with Afrikaners, and they're going to be part of it. And there's really nothing stopping that reality. If you look at how Afrikaners are building, how we're building to stay, that reality is the future. So you can either be antagonistic towards that reality, or you can accept it and actually build alongside it and with it. Annie says, "Oh, there seems to be a little bit of a delay on my chat display side. There we go." Annie says, "Long time no see, Aaron." So, all right, no, dankie dat jy ingeskakel het, Annie. Let's see. Dian Veldhuisen says, "Ek sal nêrens heen gaan nie. Ek was hier gebore en ek sal hier begrawe word." So just translation, he says, "I'm going nowhere. I was born here and I will be buried here." That's interesting, because now you have to, this again comes back to that idea of identity. I just want to get, I've made a little note here on my piece that I'm writing. I did write something specifically on that. So let me just read that for you. And always, like I say, the questions in your comments help me formulate my ideas, make a little bit of better sense of it. It really, really is valuable. Many of these streams, specifically these solo ones, I've turned into opinion pieces and essays later. And a lot of your comments and questions have actively shaped my thoughts to help me just write something better. Let me just see if I can find it. Here we go. All right. Come on, man. Yeah, so a common theme that you'll pick up in my writing is that I believe that Westerners can gain valuable insights from the Afrikaners, which they can gainfully apply in their own context. This can be achieved through exploring questions such as why so many Afrikaners choose to stay in Southern Africa despite the immense challenges they face. Why do Afrikaners not simply define themselves according to the criteria of being the white demographic of South Africa? Why do the vast majority of Afrikaners not consider the Netherlands, Germany, or France, the main places their ancestors came from, as a home to return to? How does one approach, and here's that point that you just made in the comments, Dion. How does one approach the concept of an ancestral home when your children will be the 10th generation born on a different continent to those that preceded this offshoot? And some people might brush this off as just a trivial question, but it's really important. Well, I think it is. Let's see, the chat's getting alive now. Stefan Jacob says, dalk het ons voorouers nog op dieselfde skip arriveer, selfs 'n afstammeling van Pierre Jacob, Franse huurgenoot ook. Yeah. So he says maybe me and his ancestors arrived on the same ship, and that's very possible because if there's the French Huguenot connection, there's not a lot of ships relatively. So my ancestor was Paul Roux, that came in 1688. So you can go check maybe in the French Huguenot archives on what ship. I can't remember what ship that was, but yeah, interesting point that. Yes, RJ says Afrikaans is the youngest academic language in the world, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, and one of the only 3 languages in the 20th century to develop from common just kitchen language to academic level language where you can write a PhD in it. One of only 3 languages to do it in the previous century. Kitty Ritten says, Rory Duncan here, good friend of the show, also has been a guest on the show. We discussed the Rwandan genocide. Fascinating stuff. You should definitely go check out that episode if you haven't yet. It's on my channel. It's called Heart of Darkness, the Rwandan genocide. Rory Duncan. He says, Mugabe started that with his go back to Britain speech. Besides our determination to stay at home here in SA, but it's also impossible for most of us to leave. Absolutely. Helen Duplessis says, my family has been here for ages. And Helen, I think more people are now able to pronounce your surname after Driekus Duplessis made the headlines. All right. Let's see here. I'm giving the chat a little bit of attention before I continue. I see there's another comment here. Dian says, I'll translate for the for the other listeners here. Now, hy says, ek weet nie eers wanneer my familie presies in Suid-Afrika aangekom het nie, maar my familie aan my pa en ma se kant is al vanaf die Anglo-Boereoorlog hierso. Ja, see. So he says, I don't know when my family precisely arrived in Southern Africa, but my family on my father and my mother's side has been here since the Anglo-Boer War. So that's in 1819. I'm assuming you're talking about the second Anglo-Boer War. That's 1899. But yeah, first Boer War would be 1880s. I'm not exactly precisely on the date. Early 1880s, if I remember correctly. All right, let's continue. So, and here's, as I said, with the Afrikaner diaspora, I think this is also very important to understand. Yes, there's a lot of hundreds of thousands of Afrikaners out there in Australia, in the Netherlands, in England, all across Europe, in America. And a lot of them do make a lot of effort to stay connected to the Afrikaners here in South Africa. It's very important, as I said earlier, and it's commendable because it's difficult to understand. But at the same time, and I don't think I've met many Afrikaners that would disagree with this. Our culture cannot survive purely as a diaspora culture. If all the Afrikaners were to leave South Africa and just get scattered all across the world, the culture would eventually not survive. So Afrikaners who emigrate tend to assimilate into their host nation's culture within 1 or 2 generations. Therefore, if Afrikaner culture does not have a future in Africa, its existence will eventually be relegated to the history books. Don't misunderstand me as condemning, as I said earlier, the Afrikaner diaspora. Many of them still play a valuable part in supporting cultural preservation initiatives in South Africa and actually go out of their way to speak the Afrikaans language, preserve their culture, connect and network with other Afrikaners. It's absolutely something that should be applauded. We cannot, however, dance around the thorny fact that for Afrikaner culture to have a secure future, it must have a thriving community in the region where it is indigenous to. So MP van Wyk Louw again wrote, in every, and I've took my English there. I've taken the liberty of translating these quotes myself, so they might not be perfect. I hope they are close enough to what Mr. van Wyk Louw meant. So he wrote, in every Afrikaner generation, there is this daily task, very important, to keep both of our heritages, Europe and Africa, warm and close to our hearts. To be in Africa, knowing that we are from the Old West, to be Western without disregarding a single unique influence from Africa, end quote. It's one of the most powerful quotes in his book, Liberale Nationalisme. I think it's cuts the core of this issue of identity. Who are we? Right, let's see here. I want to give the chat a little bit more attention before we continue. Yeah, Helen says I need to thank Mr. Stillnox. Right, let's see here. Zach says, scientists claim that over 98% of Afrikaners have Khoisan DNA in their genetic makeup. So basically, you guys are Africans by blood. I've seen that study. It's fascinating stuff. I don't know the statistics off my top of my head, but it makes complete sense if you know the history. Dagbreker says, goeienaand Ernst, goeienaand Dagbreker, lekker om te sien jy's hier. Dagbreker always signs in to come check out what we're discussing here. RJ asks a difficult but very, very important question. Would be interesting to see how the audience would describe their identity in 2 or 3 words. Well, there's another thing. When it comes to identity, there's a hierarchy of identity. So I'll do a whole show on just identity as well, not talking about the Afrikaner identity specifically, just identity. I'll do that in the future. But Van Zyl Slabber talked about the hierarchy of identity. For example, you are a Christian, then you're Afrikaner, then you're South African, then you're a Transvaaler, then you're a Blue Bull supporter, then you're a ANC voter, whatever, all these little identities. And everyone's hierarchy of identities looks different, but it doesn't mean just because you're one thing, you can't be another thing. So, for example, my own hierarchy of identities, I am an Afrikaner and a Christian, but those are pretty much melded together. Afrikaner and a Christian first before I'm a South African in that hierarchy. So, very simple example. If given the choice, I have to give up my Christian or Afrikaner identity or my South African ID or passport. I would give up the South African ID or passport. But everyone, like I said, everyone's hierarchy looks different. Some people are a South African first, or some people are a Christian, then a South African, then a Tswana. Some people are, yeah, well, you get the point. I don't want to just give you random different arrangements of the hierarchy, but you get my point. And the higher up that identity is in your hierarchy of identities, the harder it is for you to give it up or for you to separate from it. Some of those identities are so ingrained into your very identity, your core identity, that to separate from it would destroy you, destroy your whole sense of self. So, for example, your identity as a Afrikaans speaker is much more powerful than your identity as a Manchester United supporter. Now, some Manchester United supporters might differ, but the football club or the rugby team that you support is not as close to your heart in regards to identity as your linguistic, religious, ethnic, cultural identity. But that doesn't mean that because you're an Afrikaner, you can't also be a South African. Just because you're a South African, you can't also be a Christian. Just because you're a Christian means you can't be a Arsenal supporter. You can have an entire hierarchy, a collection of identities. It's very important because a lot of people, I think, often maliciously say, well, you value Afrikaner identity so much. Why do you even talk about South Africa or being South African? You're a traitor to South Africa or whatever. That's not how it works. You can be multiple identities. Like I said, they fit into a hierarchy, and every one of us have different arrangements in that hierarchy. All right, but I've gotten off track from my, not really, but a little bit. So that's exactly why organizations like AfriForum and the broader solidarity movement and projects like Urania are working and building tirelessly to ensure that there is a future for Afrikaners in Southern Africa for generations to come. This mindset is exemplified in the solidarity movement slogan, Bou om te bly, building to stay. Many of our community-based initiatives also benefit a wider society. A pothole filled by AfriForum volunteers does not ask every motorist whether they are an Afrikaner or not before they drive over it. The majority of those who live in neighborhoods made safer by AfriForum neighborhood watchers are not AfriForum members. Saltec serves any student willing and able to receive their training in Afrikaans. However, as Flip Base, the chairperson of the Solidarity Movement, said, very important, you can remember this saying, we are allowed to be on our own side. Very important. It's I didn't put it here in my notes, but it's one of those, another brilliant quote from MP van Wyk Louw, who says, the Bible and God demands that you love your neighbor like yourself, not that you love your neighbor more than yourself, as many people often demand of us. And he's speaking in the Afrikaner context, in a multicultural context, broadly, actually, in a principled sense, where you are allowed to be on your own side, and you don't have to be an ethno-masochist, ethno-masochist, or a what would you call it? I'm trying to think. I don't think it's a new term, but a telescopic ethno-nationalist, where you feel ethno-nationalistic about another group of people that are not you, and you feel like a lot of people when they look at conflicts internationally or somewhere that they have no connection to, they often feel almost like ethno-nationalistically connected to one of the sides in that conflict. But when it comes to their own people, they don't feel the same. It's a strange, so like I said, it's a clunky term, but you know what I mean, a telescopic pride or connection to a culture or people that's not even connected to you, and also that often goes with ethno-masochism. So masochism, the love of hurting yourself or inflicting pain on yourself. Dian Veldhuizen says, baie van ons gebore in die 2000s raak meer en meer betrokke. That's excellent. He says, more and more of us born in the 2000s are getting more involved in community-based organizations and building their communities. Fascinating stuff to hear. Great. Or fantastic, rather, I should say. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, Dagbreker is correct. The chat little highlight tool was lagging a little bit again, so I'm just going to give it a second. He says oikophobic. Yes, that's correct. EC says, what you speak of is something I greatly resonate with, being from two very disparate lineages, each oceans apart. I must make peace with my ancestors as well as the land I was born in. Like I said, you have that hierarchy of identities. Just because you have a connection to one doesn't mean then you have to throw away all the others. You can have multiple identities in this regard. My wife is a good example. Her mother is English from Liverpool and her father is as Boer as a Boer can be. But she's proud of both those heritages that form part of her identity. And that's how you should approach it. It's not healthy if you have different lineages and heritages and you just take one and all the others you just throw away and you say, well, I don't want anything to do with these. They're still part of you, and you should know the history, know where you come from, and you can have a healthy identity hierarchy that incorporates all of those identities. One doesn't have to reign supreme and just eliminates all the others. That's a false choice that you're being presented by malicious people. Bianca. That's funny, Rory. All right. Let's see. Where was I? Yes. So Afrikaners are not going anywhere. That's the key point. If you truly love Africa and have a genuine connection to the land, you'd be hard pressed to find another group that shares your passion as deeply and as stubbornly as the Boers, as the Boere. The African nationalists, the ones often voicing go back to Europe rhetoric, who claim to love Africa so deeply, could actually learn a thing or two from those stubborn Afrikaners. If only they could find the humility to listen. Right. So, as I also told someone, I don't remember how long, I think 2 weeks ago or something, where they said, go back to Europe. Why are you still here? I said, well, no, they said, South Africa is not your ancestral homeland. I'm like, 7 generations at least. I'm tracking only one family line back to an ancestor. I mean, there's hundreds of different lines as well. That could be even earlier. That connects me to an earlier date to Africa. But the earliest one I could track, or my father could track, was the 1688 Paul Roux. So that's 7 generations of my ancestors at least that are buried here in Africa. I'm blessed that I'm the 8th and still alive, and I'm blessed that the 8th is still alive, and I am the 9th. But there's also another thing that I think needs touching on. It's a quote that I have quoted often on this channel. I've incorporated it into my writing, but it's again that quote of Small Nations by Milan Kundera, the Czech writer. I quoted it in my piece, A Time to Dig Trenches, that I wrote for IM 1776, actually the intro quote to that piece. And he wrote, and this is more directed at not those that maliciously ask, why don't you just go back to Europe, but those that sympathetically ask, why don't you just go back to Europe? So Milan Kundera wrote, small nations, the concept is not quantitative. It points to a condition, a fate. Small nations lack that felicitous sense of an eternal past and future. At a given moment in their history, they all pass through the antechambers of death in constant confrontation with the arrogant ignorance of the mighty. They see their existence as perpetually threatened, or with a question mark hovering over it, for their very existence is the question. End quote. So often, I think people with good intentions that misunderstand why Afrikaners stay in South Africa are coming at it from a lens where they themselves see their people as having an eternal past and an eternal future. There will always be Americans, there will always be Germans, there will always be Japanese, there will always be French, there will always be British. What are you talking about? You know what I mean. That question is not as simple for Afrikaners. We can't just puff up our chests and say there will always be Afrikaners or there will always be Boere or Boers. There is a question mark hovering over that existential question. And as a small nation, you understand it. Afrikaners are by no means unique in this sense. We form part of a vast collection of small nations all across the world, where your future is not guaranteed. And this influences our politics. This influences our organizations. This influences our behavior, and it influences on an individual level how we form identities and how we discuss topics relating to identity. So it's important to understand that dynamic when it comes to Afrikaners. It's not just a simple materialistic thing. It really is, it goes much deeper than that. Let's see, what's the chat been up to while I did my little monologue. Helen said, it's going to give me some trouble again with displaying the little chats. Okay, let's give it a second. I'll read to you a little bit from, so that's the end of that note. I want to read you some from my other piece as well. Hear what you think. You can give me some feedback as well on the Who Are We piece that I'm right. There we go. So Helen says, most of us here are a mix, no pure nations here. I am who I am says, this is how we ought to know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Yes. Charles van Onselen says, I've never understood that goad. To go back to Europe, we have zero real ties to Europe in the way implied by illiterates. RJ says Afrikaner stubbornness is often misconstrued as belligerence. Oh, we're pretty stubborn. Ons is hardkoppig. Nobody can deny that. All right. So the other piece that I'm working on is the one about who are we. It's still early stages. I still want to make a lot of changes, but this, like I said, this type of formats of discussing these ideas helps a lot. So let's see here. So this question of identity, it's important to understand that our identities can be renewed and even rediscovered. So just because it is currently autumn or even winter does not mean that one cannot hold out hope for spring. For example, in South Africa, something is stirring among the Afrikaner community. In 2023, we witnessed 32,000 Afrikaners gather at the Voortrekker Monument on the day of the vow, 16 December, that commemorates the Battle of Blood River, where the Voortrekkers took a vow that God should protect them on this day. And this 32,000 Afrikaners gathering in 2023 was the third largest such gathering since the monument was inaugurated in 1949. Let me just make a little note here for myself. All right. And this was our third largest gathering since 1949 when the monument was inaugurated. In America, questions of identity are also once again forcing themselves into center stage through many fascinating public debates and discussions. And this was most recently encapsulated in a pertinent dialogue between Lafayette Lee and Daryl Cooper, or Martin Maid, published in IM 1776. I think it's called, let me just check here, the American Nation, Ethnogenesis. Fascinating dialogue. Go check it out on IM 1776. So, let's see here. Those questions that I asked earlier about, like, why do Afrikaners stay in Africa? Why do they value their identity so deeply? I mean, any sincere attempt to answer such questions, or that any such attempt to answer these questions, which wishes to bear any type of fruit, must primarily rely on a lens that is not purely a materialistic one. As Sir Arthur Conan Doyle astutely observed, no one can know or appreciate the Boer who does not know his past, for he is what his past has made him, end quote. And my people's past is fraught with non-materialist reasoning, sometimes during our most dire moments. I can think of no more striking example as when 464 Voortrekkers put their faith in a vow to God at the Battle of Blood River in 1838, which enabled them to withstand an onslaught from a force of between 25,000 to 30,000 Zulus without suffering a single casualty. We therefore have a responsibility to not just write off questions like who are we or as self-evident. We need to constantly explore, debate, and discuss this fundamental question, most importantly, to ensure that the next generation will be able to confidently answer it. The Afrikaner philosopher M.P. van Wyk Loeb described. Oh yeah, no, I've already read that quote. So yeah, again, identity is a treasure. It is something that you keep close to your heart, and it's something that you need to cherish in our rootless world. All right. Checking what you're saying in the comments. The Means of Destruction says, hey guys, what's going on? Hey Means, good and you. Just having a fascinating chat here with the audience on matters of identity. Dion says, ek en my familie was daar in 16 December 2023. He says him and his family were there at the Voortrekker Monument on 16 December, Day of the Vow 2023. So he's one of the 32,000 that were there. Great stuff. Fantastic stuff. Let's see here. Wait, the chat's giving me a little bit of a delay here. I'll put the comment on now, just waiting for it to, if StreamYard will allow me. There we go. The vet says, so my comment about fighting or we will die out gets deleted. I'm not really checking comments that thoroughly, the vet. I'm reading here from my notes and only catching up with the chat now. So I don't know, maybe you're using language that YouTube is not liking. I mean, die out, probably that type of language that YouTube is flagging. I've got no control over that. Let's see here. All right, I think that's catched up. That's caught up for now. Right. So also something that I wanted to touch on regarding many of these comments is a theme in 2024, this theme of identity. In specifically the context as someone that's part of the Solidarity Movement and AfriForum, I'm constantly realizing how important it is that we not just explain how we are doing what we're doing, like, for example, building new education institutions, building parallel institutions, establishing security networks, not just the how we're building here in South Africa for a future for our communities, but also the why. The why is so important. Why are we building? And this is what I try to achieve with this stream, is to give you a little bit of an idea of the why. Why we are building to stay. That slogan of Boom to Blay, building to stay. That's I hope that I've achieved it to a large extent. But all right, I think that's the end of that's what I wanted to discuss. I'm not going to artificially keep the stream going for longer. Thanks again for all of your comments. Like I said, this type of conversation, even though we're not sitting in like a room where we can actually face-to-face converse, it still is very valuable, your questions and your comments. That helps me frame my thoughts better and develop my thoughts. Let's see. A Slippery Pickle says, how do I get AfriForum in my community? Well, send an email to AfriForum. Go to our website and go to the contact us. Send us a message, and you'll get directed to the right people. I just realized there was a question that I didn't answer. Let me just quickly, let's make it the last one. Yeah, the vet that says the question about fighting or dying out that YouTube didn't put in the chat. I don't know what your original question was, but yes, veg en bou, fight and build. That's the AfriForum slogan. We fight and we build. Is fighting injustice, fighting persecution, fighting the evil forces that are stacked against us, but also building. We can never tire of building, even when it is with worn out tools. We can't just focus on building, and we can't just focus on fighting. It has to be that two-pronged approach. And that's, I hope that answers your question. All right. So I see people are getting the hint that we're winding down now or wrapping up. Once again, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for all of your comments and questions. And if you have any further comments and questions and you're not catching this live, or you did watch it live and you thought about a question while you're lying in bed tonight, you're like, I should have said that or asked that, put it in the comment section after the stream is done. I read all of them and I really appreciate them. And yeah, nice to see you here, memes. And then CB says, like the video before leaving. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. If you're new to this channel and you like these types of conversations and these types of topics, you can subscribe. I really appreciate it. Helps you also stay up to date on when I go live or when I have a new video out. Also click that bell if YouTube is being funny about not giving you notifications. Click the bell next to subscribe to be sure that, hopefully to be sure that YouTube notifies you. And then also sign up to my Telegram or become a member or part of my Telegram to also keep up to date. There's a link in the description. Go check it out. And yeah, follow me on X and on social media if you also want to keep up to date on some of my thoughts that I pen. Oklahoma Sun says, thanks. Your programs are important for Americans and even for Okies. Who am I am where I am. Would you agree that such a strong inclination towards one's identity is sometimes not too good? Yes, actually, MP van Wyk Low writes on it. I'll have to elaborate on it on a different stream. I have to go read exactly where he has a fascinating take on this. Exactly, of there's a cultural pride and a cultural nationalism, and then there's cultural chauvinism, where it goes into I'm willing to destroy other cultures and peoples because they are not me. They are not. They don't share my exact views and worldview. And but like I said, I'll have to get back to you on exactly. There's a great piece on it, or great page on it in one of MP van Wyk Low's books. But absolutely, that love of your identity can bleed into imperialism. It can bleed into destructive actions. So absolutely, yeah, it's the nature of the platform. Unfortunately, we take what we can get. RJ says, building is a matter of faith, especially building when your future against all odds. Yes. Dagbreker says, very insightful, much to think about. Well, that makes it worth it. If I can give you a little bit of thought to chew on this week, then that's worth it for me. CB says, following you guys closely down there and rooting for you, sending you love and prayers. Thank you very much, CB. Really appreciate it. Charles van Onsland says, thanks, Adams. Enjoy your evening, everyone. Bye, Donkey Charles. I appreciate that you signed in and signed off. All right, I'm going to start wrapping up, but I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a attention here on the stream before I finally say goodbye. Ja, YouTube is baie nie okay nie. Dit weet ek stem saam. Gereeld nie okay nie. Well, thank you very much, RT Panda. I really appreciate it. All right, that brings us to the end. Cheers, guys. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stream. Check you again next week. Next week's guest is we're going to be talking about music and meaning, and a high-profile guest for me, Akira the Don. You might have seen some of his work. Fascinating guy. Really looking forward to that. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening, rest of your week. Hope I gave you something to chew on. Keep asking these questions. Don't write off the question of who are we as just trivial or self-explanatory. Keep at it. Keep thinking about it, even as you stroll on your weekly walk. All right. Cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.